Today I'd like to continue our journey through the book of Judges. We've been doing chapter 6 of that book, and we're looking at the story of Gideon, one of the judges that was raised up at this time to really help the Jewish people achieve independence and fight against their enemies who were really all around them. Because at this time in their history, they're settled in different cities and towns, but right next to them are other tribes who have different practices, different viewpoints, and there's naturally conflicts that arise. So Gideon is trying to unify the people and help them. And one of the things he has done here in chapter 6 that's sort of got him in a little bit of trouble here is that he's taken down an altar that his father Joash had built to the god Baal, and he decided to rebuild this altar and to make this altar dedicated to the God of Israel, Yahweh. So Gideon was given the name Jerubbaal, let Baal take action, because he said, well, if Baal doesn't like this new altar, let him come down and do his thing and destroy this altar. So he's kind of challenging the god Baal. Gideon then summons many of the tribes, and he wants these tribes to help him defeat the armies of the Midianites, the Amalekites, and the Kedemites. So there are three different tribes within Canaan. They control different lands, different towns, different cities, and they are unified now against the Israelites. And Gideon says, we've got to do something about this and take some action. So he asked for a sign from God. And he asked that if I'm going to do this, God, you've got to send me a sign, because he's sort of reluctant. He has kind of a nice life where he is, and he's, should I really get involved and do this thing? Well, let's see. If God wants me to do it, because he seems to be a man of faith, if God wants me to do it, I'm going to ask God for a sign. Just like many of us in different circumstances in our lives, where we have a difficult decision to make, and sort of ask God, can I have a little sign to help me make this decision, to help me make it a little bit easier to follow this path? And so that's the ask that Gideon has of God. And he says, well, if the dew would come on the woolen fleece alone while the ground remains dry. And so put the dew on the fleece, but I don't want it on the ground, which would be, of course, very unusual. The normal course of events, the dew is going to fall on the ground first, and then, of course, maybe then on the fleece. So this is a kind of an extraordinary ask of Gideon for God. But lo and behold, it happens just that way. So Gideon has his sign from God. So with that sign, it's kind of, well, I guess I got to do this now. I got the sign, even though he's reluctant to do this. So Gideon says, well, that was one sign. Still, I don't know if I should do this. Hey, maybe I will ask God for a second sign. So there is Gideon. You can see how weak his faith is in this mission that he feels God might want him to do. So he says, in the second sign, the woolen fleece should remain dry, but the ground would be wet. So opposite of the first sign, he wants the second sign, which probably would be the more normal course of events. Lo and behold, next day, this is what happens. The woolen fleece will dry, but the ground, that is wet. So one sign, not enough. Two sign, well, maybe I should do it. I got a second sign. So then in chapter 7, we're going to get into the actual plan that Gideon is going to follow from God. So God tells Gideon, first of all, that he has too many soldiers. Now imagine, as a leader in battle, someone telling you that you have too many soldiers. Usually it's just the opposite. We don't have enough soldiers to do this thing. I'd like more soldiers. God could just send me some more. God says, no, you have too many. People would think with all these soldiers that the soldiers had won the victory and that they'd won by their sheer numbers. They outnumbered the opposition. And they would not attribute the victory to God. So you can see the reasoning here in this dialogue between God and Gideon. Well, if I have 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 more soldiers than the group that I'm fighting against, they're going to say, well, of course you were going to win. You had all these extra soldiers. It was obvious that you were going to win. But if you have less soldiers than the enemy, people say, well, maybe it was God who was with you. Maybe God wanted you to do this. Maybe you truly were following the will of God in this fight. It was a fight for your independence. It was a fight so you could practice your religion and that your people could flourish. So maybe God did have something to do with this. And it wasn't all the soldiers and their numbers. So Gideon is now going to have to pare down his army. It's interesting how he goes about it. Gideon speaks to his army, and he says to the army, if you feel afraid, if you feel fearful, then you should really leave. So again, many soldiers, they're apprehensive before they're going to go into a battle. Normal that they might think, yeah, maybe I should leave. I don't really want to fight. It's too dangerous. The family back home, I want to be with them. I don't really like this whole idea of going against, there's 3 different groups of peoples. I don't want to be involved in this. And so they were apprehensive, they were fearful. So Gideon said, if that's the case, go home. 22,000 leave after Gideon gives them that option. Significant part of the army, 22,000, more than half. 10,000 are left. Still quite a substantial force. So there's Gideon with the 10,000. Then God tells Gideon, 10,000. Even 10,000 is too many. And Gideon's like, I just more than cut it in half, and now you're saying this is too many. God told Gideon to follow God's instructions. Follow where I'm going to lead you. And so God tells Gideon to lead the soldiers down to the water. And next time we're going to see how Gideon's soldiers are pared down even from this group of 10,000.